Peace be with you. Spirit of love, move among us, so that in knowing the truth, we shall be truly free. May it be so. As I studied our UU principles in preparation for our shared ministry together, I was quickly convinced that the first and second principles are the bedrock on which all of our other principles are built. Our first principle, the inherent dignity and worth of every person, sets the stage for why the remaining six principles exist. While our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, guides our actions in relation to those principles. The first principle goes beyond a superficial tolerance for human differences. This principle proclaims that every person is valuable, every person matters. Every person deserves to be treated with respect and to have individual sovereignty over their body and identities. And none of this is earned. Our dignity and worth are inherent. That means that they are part of our humanity. The first principle also goes beyond merely accepting or celebrating human difference. We must actively seek to know and understand other people. We can neither recognize, show reverence for, or honor the inherent dignity and worth of every person, or any person for that matter, if we don't truly or fully see them, or if we are willfully ignorant of their lived experiences. And this is important because without truly knowing our neighbor, we cannot live our second principle. Now, I have a slight complaint with the wording of the second principle. If I had my way, I would have written it to say compassion, equity, and justice in human relations. This is why. Without compassion for other people, we would never be able to recognize the need for equity. Now, what is equity? Equity is not the same as equality, though sometimes the two words are used synonymously. Equity, unlike equality, does not see people as individuals with equal experiences. Rather, equity recognizes that everyone has unique experiences that make their interaction with the world slightly different. For this reason, we must make accommodations to ensure all have truly equal opportunities to experience our world. For example, I have glasses. Without glasses, I cannot really safely or meaningfully navigate the world. I need them to see, I need them to read. Because glasses cost money, I have to pay to see. So I have to pay to see the people that I care about. I have to pay to do my job, to do my job. I have to pay to drive my car so that I can see the roads that I'm driving on. Thus, I'm not equal to a person who doesn't need glasses. They can see everything they want to for free. Equity requires some form of accommodation be made for me in order for me to have an equal opportunity as someone else who doesn't need glasses to experience our world. And this might look like a free visit to the eye doctor once a year or a free pair of glasses every year or so. Without equity, we cannot achieve justice because there is no justice if people do not truly have equal opportunities with one another to experience and live in our world. From a practical perspective, money is one of the biggest areas of inequality in our country today. Since changes to the US tax code in the 1980s, the gap between the very wealthy and the middle class has grown exponentially. In practical terms, this means that nearly half of Americans do not make enough money to meet their basic needs. This includes housing, food, and healthcare. And I'm not just talking about the very poor, I'm talking about the lower end of the middle class do not make enough money to meet their basic needs. Rising food, fuel, housing, and healthcare costs means that millions of Americans are one catastrophe away from bankruptcy or homelessness or both. In Camp Hill, we understand this very clearly. When we experienced our once in a lifetime climate catastrophe earlier this year, many of our neighbors' lives were thrown into a state of chaos that they are still experiencing now, almost halfway through the year. Those experiencing the worst of the chaos, the ones who didn't have insurance to cover the losses to their vehicles and houses, are our neighbors who live at or below the poverty line, and the vast majority of them are Black. In this way, Camp Hill is a microcosm or a tiny representation of our society, where those who are economically vulnerable tend to be Black. Now, it is easy to sit back and say, well, people in the most economically vulnerable position, they have what it takes to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So they just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get it done. Or, well, maybe they just didn't work hard enough. And if they'd worked hard enough, they'd have the money set aside in order to repair their homes and their cars. But neither of these responses, or responses similar to them, recognize or respect the inherent dignity and worth of our neighbors, because they ignore their lived experiences and how those lived experiences are built upon generation after generation after generation of economic and political inequality. Until the passage of the 13th Amendment in the United States in 1865, the enslavement of Black Americans was legal. Newly freed Black folks in the aftermath of the 13th Amendment, so after 1865, did not receive any kind of reimbursement for 246 years of forced free labor. Many of them were stuck with the choice of, am I homeless or do I sharecrop on the plantation where I used to be enslaved? And many resorted to sharecropping, which is itself a form of economic slavery, in which you, the sharecropper, provide a share of your crops to the person who owns the land and is letting you use a portion of their land. Often the amount that you had to pay was so great that all you got was barely enough to live on, not in any way enough to save money so that you can pass wealth on to your children when you die. Sharecropping has given way to our minimum wage culture, where so many of our poor work from sunup to sundown at these menial laboring jobs where they're barely paid enough to live, really not enough to live on. And there's definitely not anything left over at the end of the day to save. And you can't really move from job to job because the working conditions and the pay are the same. So it's really slavery by another name. It's economic slavery. After 1865, any Black families in the South who were able to build businesses or even create better lives for themselves here in the South were often the target of racial violence from white people who didn't like to see Black people succeed. And sometimes this racial violence resulted in death through lynching. Other times, nobody died, but the business or the home or the property was gone. It was destroyed, or it was illegally seized through manipulation of the court system. And this happened even here in our beloved Camp Hill, Alabama. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that's 99, almost 100 years after the 13th Amendment ended slavery in the United States, that Black Americans were at least equal before the law, on paper at least, if not necessarily in practice. Now, I don't know if y'all want to do the math. I did it for you. That's only 59 years. 59 years since discrimination based on race was made illegal in this country. There are members of our church who were older than 59 years old, who lived during a time when it was legal to discriminate against someone based on the color of their skin. My grandparents lived during a time when it was legal to discriminate. My father was born 2 years after the Civil Rights Act was passed. He's the first member of my family to go to a desegregated school. It's one generation separate from me. "59 years is not a long time to catch up for almost 300 years of legal inequality. And that's 300 years or almost 400 years. That's 400 years when intergenerational wealth was not being transferred. Now, my family, we're sharecroppers. My great 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 grandmother, no, two greats, my great great grandmother married outside of her social class to a poor white man, and her father disowned her, and she ended up being a sharecropper with her husband on the plantation that would have been hers if she had married within her social class. My grandmother grew up in a one-room shack with a dirt floor, but my family still has intergenerational wealth. My grandfather was able to go to college and get a degree in engineering and to make a very good income and to pass that wealth on to my parents and through my parents to me. And he had that opportunity in the 1960s when Black families who lived in similar situations did not have the same opportunity to go to college and to get the kinds of jobs that my grandfather got. So my family, even though I grew up literally dirt poor in a one-room, I didn't grow up dirt poor. My grandparents grew up dirt poor in a one-room shack with a dirt floor, no running water, until my grandmother was 8. Even though my family had the opportunity to build some intergenerational wealth in the last 50 years, we were only able to do that because we were not disadvantaged by being politically disenfranchised, by being allowed to vote, by being allowed to go to college, to be able to go to a good school, be able to get a good job. It wasn't really until the late 70s, early 80s that we started to see a lot more middle class and even upper class Black Americans being able to get these jobs where they earned a lot of money to create intergenerational wealth. So it's not a matter of working hard enough. It's not a matter of being able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's having the access to resources beyond your paycheck to enable you to overcome the vast amounts of income inequality that exists in our country. And that's just not a reality that many of our neighbors experience. Living our first and second principles requires us to take time to understand the lived experiences of our neighbors. And today, we've only begun to touch the surface of the context in which many of our neighbors live. We didn't even explore the last 50 years of their context. I leave that for you to discover on your own as you get to know our neighbors, as you meet one or two people that you've never talked to before here in Camp Hill. What do we do then once we know our neighbor? How do we live our lives with the knowledge that there are people in our community who do not have the same advantages as we do, who do not have equal opportunities or equal access to the benefits of being an American because of their lived experiences? How do we respond to that? Our second principle tells us how to respond to this. It should drive our reaction. Our compassion that we feel for our neighbor as we make that human connection with them by knowing them should lead us to seek equitable solutions to their negative lived experiences. We do this in part through our food pantry. That is one of the ways that we seek an equitable solution. We know our neighbors can't afford groceries. Many of them can't afford to drive to get good groceries. Maybe they could afford to get the groceries, but they don't have a means to get there. So we step in and we provide that accommodation in the form of free food that is theirs. No questions asked. We also do this through our other community ministries. Providing this space in our former parsonage as a community center allows organizations or groups of people in this community who would like to gather and organize and create meaningful experiences for themselves, but don't have a place to do that or can't afford to rent a place to do that, we provide them that space because it's not about making money or being a business. It's about equity. It's about creating opportunities for people who don't have other opportunities because of their lived experience. But all of this is not enough. We can work to make our little corner of Alabama nicer, but that's not really going to bring about the justice that we want to see. That is micro level equity. We want macro level equity. We want every person in our state and in our country to have the same and equal opportunity to experience the benefits of this world. And so our compassion must lead us to advocate for those of our neighbors who have been marginalized and outcast by injustices in our society, so that through equitable solutions, we will all have access to this world. Through equal access that is brought about by equitable solutions, we will attain justice. And when we finally have justice, then our world will truly experience peace. May it be so. Beloved, as you journey this week, remember to be kind to your neighbor, be kind to yourself. Respect, honor, and hallow the dignity and worth that is inherent in every human being. And strive for justice, equity, and compassion in your relations with other people. And may peace and love abide with you and me until we are together again.